Welcome to the Switchblade Sisters Social Club, a true crime podcast where two sisters exploit their worst fears for your entertainment. You're welcome. I'm Dee.
And I'm Rhonda, and together we are the Sake Sisters. For more information, check out our website at www.switchbladesistersocialclub.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at Switchblade Sisters Social Club.
Thanks for listening. Hi, everyone. This is Switchblade Sisters Social Club, a true crime podcast where two sisters, that's my sister Rhonda and me, exploit our worst fears for your entertainment. You're welcome. Hi, Rhonda.
Hi.
Well, really excited because we record in advance, as we always say, but as this episode goes out, I will be in New Orleans. Woohoo!
Oh, I'm jealous.
I know. I'm going with our dear friend Sarita for Essence Festival. I'm really excited.
But you know what? Whenever you travel, I feel like I'm with you because you send me everything in real time so that I can post it on the socials.
Honestly, like if you hate socials as much as I do, I don't mind the interacting and engaging part, but it's the scheduling the content, and you know, you really have to be consistent to make it work. Because
that's the bit I love.
Great, and that's why you and I work as a team, because I send you all the stuff, and then you do that side, and then I go on there and I have chit chats with our audience, which I absolutely love. So so you'll be living vicariously through me as I am in Essence Festival. We will.
That being said, can I just interject? I do love the DMs.
Okay, yes, well,
so send us those.
Yes. So I'm going for Essence Festival, which is going to be amazing. But also, obviously, it's not my first time in New Orleans. It is my first time since I can legally drink. So party time. But Sarita and I, we did an episode on New Orleans in my previous podcast, We Knew the Moon. So you can go check that out. But we covered a bunch of different creepy shit that has happened there.
That episode really made me want to go. It really made me want to go. That was a good one.
Yeah, so we're going to be going to a lot of the places. In the episode, I actually made up our travel day, our little sort of map. Yeah,
the itinerary. The itineraries on the socials. If
anyone
wants to follow their movements.
So, but if any of our listeners are at Essence Festival or in New Orleans, let us know, because I would love it if you came up and said hi. If you've got any recommendations, anyone that's been to New Orleans, got any recommendations, let me know. I'm always up for knowing. If you've got any recommendations, this is a special appeal for good places to eat. If you're vegetarian, then let me know that too, because last time I went, I was eating fish, and the seafood there is amazing. I don't eat fish anymore. So help a sister out. Tell me where I can get my food.
And you know what? I've heard in Louisiana, they're very like open-minded about their food, especially seafood, like sea creatures.
Yeah. I had some really interesting food, but yeah, now this time around, I'm sure there's going to be lots of accommodation for vegetarians, but I'm always looking for good food and recommendations. So let us know. Also, talking about Sarita, who we fangirl over all the time, so do check her out. She's just so fucking fabulous.
A queen in the podcasting world, and just a queen in general.
And if you ever need inspiration for social media content ideas, go check out her Instagram, because it is so beautiful and so cool. Yeah. So but she sent us a gift recently.
Oh, do you know what?
By coincidence, we're both wearing it.
We are. La, 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 la.
There's absolutely no way we'll be able to get the design detail here on the screen, but it's a gorgeous necklace by
mollyandlizzie.co.uk.
Yeah, gorgeous stuff. And it's really cute because it's got this little design etch, so it looks like fairly traditional, doesn't it? Like,
yeah, very feminine.
And then you look up close and you realize the etch design is a pair of underpants, ladies' pants, with flowers coming out of them. So,
do you know, it's funny that you say that, because I didn't even notice that. I just saw the flowers, but my eyes are clearly not working. So I didn't even notice that.
Just super cute. So thanks, Sarita. We love our gift.
Oh, do you know what? I voice noted her immediately as soon as I got it, and it honestly, like, it almost choked me up, because it was so. She wants to say, you know, well done on the podcast, and she's just been so supportive. And honestly, when somebody does something so nice and it just catches you off guard because you're not expecting it, and so it was so nice.
Yeah, and to get something in the post that's not a bill was
Oh
really
my God,
good also.
yeah.
But yeah, and it came with such an inspirational message, which I absolutely loved. A girl can be two things: what she wants and who she wants.
Yeah, I like that. It was great packaging, huh?
Yeah.
Great brand. I'm definitely going to buy more from that brand.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Sarita. We loved
you and it.
Yes. You had a fun discovery.
Oh, I did. You know when you come across something, you think, oh, this came into my life for a reason. So basically, I spend a lot of time on Instagram, obviously, because most of my work is through it. So I discovered Graveline Tours. Now they're based in LA, unfortunately, but again, I'm so jealous we're not there because this was made for us. And basically, this is what their bio statement says. We put death on the map. Guided funeral limousine tours of LA's most notorious, haunting, and disturbing locations. So basically what they do is they take you around in the funeral limousine around LA to all these different sites. And you know, the Black Dahlia case, which you talked about very briefly when you've reviewed, who are the two girls in Hawaii, their podcast?
Oh, yeah. Faces of Evil / Root of Evil. Yeah. Check out their podcast. They are absolutely amazing as well. And they have a family connection to the Dahlia case, which they explore in depth in their first podcast. It's just so freaky.
So basically, this tour company takes you to the ballroom where the Black Dahlia was last seen alive. They take you to sites to do with not Victoria Wood. What's her name?
Natalie.
Natalie Wood.
Say that again, not laughing.
And they take you to sites associated with Natalie Wood. And it's interesting because you covered spectacularly
episode 4.
Yeah, the mysterious death of Natalie Wood. They talk about the Jean Harlow house where she lived with Paul Byrne, where we covered in Murder House's episode. Literally this account, I was like, oh, they cover Brittany Murphy, which we did in episode 1. So honestly, I feel like their tour is taking you on all the sites that we have covered in our podcast. So they should
rebrand it the Switchblade Sister Social Club tour.
It's almost like there are parallel, and that's what's so weird about it. But check out their social media, check them out on Instagram. Graveline Tours, amazing. I've messaged them, they haven't replied, but hopefully they will.
I was gonna say message them. Let's get them on the show.
Oh God, yeah, that's a good idea. Because honestly, I'm obsessed with their account just because, you know, I've also been alerted to other cases that I wasn't aware of. Hollywood cases, and I love those.
I'm guessing they're going to feature soon.
But well, I've been looking into a few of the ones that are at their, like, the sites that they take you to. But what I love about the Hollywood cases is like the juxtaposition of like beautiful, glamorous Hollywood and then dark, sinister, seedy happenings. Do you know what I mean? That's what I find so interesting. And also, do you know what? All week I've been thinking about the case that you covered last week about Belle.
Triflers need not apply.
Yeah, triflers is now a word that I use in my
everyday vocab.
Yeah, every day, like it's part of my daily lexicon now. But it's so applicable for so many.
I told you I'm going to add it as a strapline to my website.
Completely. Oh my
Business cards, everything.
Yeah. Because it's true, in business you do get a lot of triflers, you know. We've got a lot of DMs asking for free advice, people calling to book it. Oh God, anyway, whatever. But I was thinking to myself, why did I enjoy that? I didn't feel, like I said to you last week, I didn't feel at the end of the episode like I do normally at the end of an episode where I'm like, oh, I'm so unsettled and so anxious. And I actually really enjoyed it. And I think it's because old-timey cases, when it happens so much in the past, it almost seems detached from reality.
Yeah, you know? I think we will mix it up a little bit and have some. Yeah. So maybe that's our light relief. It's not necessarily whether someone dies or not, because a lot of people did in that case, but maybe it's also the time period.
Yeah, because I think also part of me thought, well, they would be dead anyway because it was so long ago, right?
Maybe, but I mean, obviously there will be sort of descendants that have that probably have felt the repercussions of those actions. So, but yeah, it does feel a little bit disconnected.
It does. And obviously we try to cover everything. Our mission is to treat everything, you know, tastefully sensitively, you know, and all the rest. But there is something about a case that happened 100 years ago that just doesn't feel this.
Well, it definitely is a different vibe to like the Levi Belfield one, which happened in our neighborhood while we were growing up.
Yeah.
Very different vibe for us anyway.
Because also, I mean, we had a lot of messages after that episode. Of people
so many people that we know. Exactly.
Yeah,
that
personal anecdotes of
knew the victims, got attacked, knew people that got attacked by Levi. I mean, yeah, it didn't occur to me that we would have that response, but obviously we know so many people. I mean, Paul's dad, someone reported him to the police because he was vaguely similar description to one of the descriptions that went out about Levi before they knew who he was. So he had to go into the police station and like clear himself. Obviously he wasn't guilty. So yeah, so many people that we knew after the Levi Belfield story came out and was like,
people that knew the families. Yeah, because you know what? Because it was literally so local, you know, so many people have come out and told us, so we knew the family, or we knew this person related, or that person, or this. Yeah, horrendous. So you know what? I'm glad we are, you know, we are respectful anyway of these cases. You know, we don't sensationalize, glorify, anything like that. But it's a good reminder to remember that these victims do actually have families, and you know,
and like we talk about, there's so many victims, not just the people that lost their lives in these cases, but everyone involved in the case. We have also been just having continued support from our listeners. We're so grateful, and we want to give a shout out to the people that have left reviews. Please do consider liking, sharing, leaving a review, sending us a message saying we're doing okay. We love that shit. So Caleb, Lucy, I want to give a shout out to some of our really, really engaged listeners. Brendan, Sarita, obviously.
We've had Lynn, Laura, Caleb, Mary King. Do you know what? We've got a loyal listenership. Yeah,
so many people. I'll tell you who we can't list as our listeners. Our dad and our aunt. But and this is my fault, all right? Because you remember at the beginning of the season, I made a little promo, a couple of minutes long of, you know, from our upcoming couple of episodes. And I guess there's lots of clips of you swearing in that, because I find it funny when you swear. So when I'm picking out best bits, there's a lot of F-bombs, you know?
I try so hard not to. Do you know what I always think to myself? Oh God, I hope my clients don't listen.
But the problem is, I think that's the only thing our dad has listened to. And so obviously the impression it gives is that you say fuck every 20 seconds, you know, when actually it's closer to 10. Yeah. So he has actually asked me, when I told him it was recording today, to ask you to swear less.
I'll try.
And in response to that, I would like to say, swear more. I don't give a fuck.
Last episode, I don't think I swore once.
Oh, well done. But,
in the Khashoggi one, I did. I don't think I did once.
All right. Okay.
I tried my hardest. You know what? I'd love to know whether people want me to calm that down or not.
Yeah, let's do a poll. Just so you know, when I upload the audio, I always just tick explicit, because I just assume one of us has said cunt.
Oh, do you know, honestly, that's one thing I was thinking about. I don't think I've said it once this whole season.
Yeah, well done. Which is weird, because your nickname used to be the one that says cunt a lot.
But you know what? I've actually purposely tried not to, because just try not to. What do you do?
You know. All right, well, I would like to start the case, so let me steal your catchphrase. Just tell me the fucking story.
Okay, so do you know what? This whole season, we have
wait. I want to get comfortable, because it's my favorite bit. It's my favorite bit. Okay. The reveal, the big reveal.
Okay.
I love it in the drag world. I love it in our podcasting world.
Okay, one sec. You are going to have to edit this out. Hold on one sec.
Edit what out, Rhonda? Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, the whole season we've been asking why, but why, what? Do you know what I mean? Like,
I mean, I asked that of most of my life choices, but do you mean why we're doing a true crime podcast?
Well, you know what? I tell you what has answered that question is the amazing reviews. Like that that has made my heart sing. But we've been asking why? Why do these people exist? What makes them tick? Oh. So this episode, I'm going to cover the profile of a serial killer. Now, I don't think any of this is a surprise to you because you were someone who should be having a PhD in criminology by now with all the research you do. We have talked every episode about like the backgrounds of the killers. You know, I always want to know the backstory because I don't, you know, I've never studied psychology in my life, but it does interest me. So I always want to know what's the backstory. What's the family circumstances? You know, what happened to them? What sort of trauma have they experienced that has made them like that? Is it, you know, the result of an abusive childhood? Are people hardwired from birth? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it a mix of both? And this has been debated for over 250 years. And the scary thing is, and we know this already, that serial killers can appear to be ordinary people like your neighbor or your coworker. You're lucky if you have ordinary neighbors and coworkers. but you know, deeply traumatic experience, especially during childhood, can have an even deeper impact in adult life. So they can significantly shape an individual's personality, their life choices, and all of this has spurred research into the connection between childhood abuse and criminal behavior. In particular, the extent of childhood abuse reported among serial killers has raised the question, are serial killers born or made? Yeah, that's what I'm really interested to find out. So what they all have in common is a desire for murder and a lack of remorse. So that is one or two traits that serial killers have in common.
So what? Serial killers don't express remorse. I'm trying to think of one that has, and you're right.
When they have expressed remorse, is it legitimate or is it because they are trying to get off death row?
They're manipulating again, because many of them are manipulative.
Manipulation is a trait, isn't it? So they have such gratification from murder that they have to do it again and again. And I think this is where the remorse or lack of remorse comes into play. Sorry, one sec. I think Jim's trying to get changed. Do you want to just get changed? Yeah. Fuck, he was trying to get out. So they have such gratification from murder that they do it again and again. And I think that's where the remorse thing you have to question, because if you're remorseful about something, would you do it again and again? I don't know if I'm oversimplifying it, and maybe you can do something again and again that you feel remorseful about.
If you think of it as an addiction.
I know, I was just going to say, I know that, you know, when I quit smoking and then I had another cigarette, I feel remorseful, but I still have another cigarette.
Yeah.
You know? So I don't know if it's that, you know, that is an addiction. Is it that? I don't know. But everything is motivated by gratification and a need for control. So since Jack the Ripper terrorized London in the 1880s, criminologists have been trying to work out the minds of serial killers and what makes them tick. And psychologists say that it's a combination of factors, which, as we can imagine, not everything is black and white. There's a lot of shades of gray. So in the 1970s, the FBI added psychological profiling to their tools to capture serial killers after there was a massive increase during this era. And we've talked about that a lot, that in the 70s and the 80s, you know, it seemed to just come on the scene, you know, like it was a new thing. And profiling.
That must have been a terrifying time. It was before our time. But yeah, between all the cults that were going on at that time, I mean, no wonder there was satanic panic, because they were just like, everything's going to shit, right? A bunch of, I mean, the 70s in terms of serial killers in the States.
Completely. And horrific cases, which I'm going to talk about. Horrific killers, horrific cases. So profiling began when they opened a new FBI academy in the early 1970s, and that was documented in the drama series Manhunter? Mindhunter. Yeah, that was Mindhunter.
Manhunter is my love.
Oh yeah. So it's Mindhunter. That was a great
Sutton.
series. Do you need to go, Jim? Go.
Okay, just wait. Give me enough time to cut him out.
Okay. So, this center was set up by Patrick Mullaney and Howard, is it Teton or Teton? Teton, I'm going to say.
How's it spelled?
T-E-T-E-N. T-E-T. Tetton, okay. So this center was set up by Patrick Mullaney and Howard Tetton, who led the first profiling unit. So apparently the first thing that is looked at is the family dynamic and the relationship with the family. And that's why I kept asking you about Levi Belfield. Tell me about his mother, because the father wasn't mentioned, but his mother was very protective of him, and still supporting him, despite the fact that it's clear that the guy was a psycho. So I wanted to know what the hell's going on there, you know?
Yeah.
So the family dynamic and relationship with the family is a huge factor. The mother and the father and the relationship that parents had together is also another huge contributing factor. So Mullaney says that serial killers often come from broken homes, something that we've seen, often from homes with dominant mothers and an absent father. Now, at first, when I read about the dominant mothers, I thought, well, what's the problem with that? You know, clearly, if there's an absent father, the mother has to then become more dominant. Well, not become more dominant, but is the key primary carer in that child's life. So I didn't like,
and it also reeks a smack of chauvinism, like, oh, look at that dominant woman, that bossy woman, and it's so like, is she just doing what a man would do? Yeah, but she's a woman.
Exactly, a woman that's left in a position of being the primary carer, not out of choice, most likely. And I didn't like the way that that was sort of written about. But so I looked into it further. What do they mean by dominant mother? Because Arab? In my mind, you know what? In my mind, I thought it can only be a good thing for a boy to be raised by a strong woman. But in this case, I'm doing some further research. They mean dominant to the point of abusive.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's what we're talking about. Yeah, that's what we're talking about in this case, or in these cases. And the father's influence seems to be missing in their early years. So these were common factors. And there's some sort of revulsion to the dominant mother figure, which is often later taken out on women through the course of their lives. Again, reminding me of Levi Belfield. So personal traumas can affect behavioral choices. If you take the example of, for example, you know, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, one of the most disgusting, honestly, you watch The Night Stalker, that one really disturbed me. Especially because kids were involved as well. So he was found guilty of murdering 13 people in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and had a very disturbed childhood, you know, enduring brutal beatings by his father. He also came from a family where there was just a lot of sinister shit. However, that's probably the best case of citizen's arrest that we've ever seen, right? Oh,
it's amazing, and you can see it.
Yeah, watch The Night Stalker on Netflix. It is disturbing, but to see Richard Ramirez be
arrested by like a gang of people,
a mob, you know,
because what happened was he didn't realize that he had been identified, and so he came back from somewhere to LA, and his face is plastered everywhere. And so as he gets off the bus at the bus garage and is spotted, identified almost immediately, because he's also quite unique looking as well.
Yeah, distinct features.
Exactly.
And the scene is just a spectacle to watch. Watch him be arrested by a mob of angry people. You know, it was actually quite amazing. So I'd watch it for that alone.
I might go and watch that after this, just to restore my faith in humanity.
So serial killer duo Otis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas, who were believed to have murdered hundreds of people, were both victims of physical and psychological abuse. Specifically, they were made to dress up as young girls when they were kids and beaten. Research shows that as children, serial killers in general suffer significant abuse, psychological and physical, but often also sexual. So we are talking every kind of abuse: sexual, psychological, physical, emotional.
And to the extreme, by the sound of it. Yeah. I mean,
so,
any...
Yeah.
Are you going to talk about how some actually go on to kill their mothers?
No.
Okay, then let me... because I can think of also at least 2 serial killers, Ed Gein and Ed Kemper.
Yeah.
Who killed their own mother as a result of all of this, or you know, in some capacity. And I think Ed Kemper killed his grandparents as well, didn't he?
Yeah. So, and Ed Kemper is an interesting one because his IQ He had such a high IQ. He was technically a genius. And didn't he work for the police? Was he a police officer or he worked with them?
He couldn't be a police officer because he was actually too tall.
Right?
Yeah. So, but he did work with them in different capacities, like as a civilian, you know?
And he was trusted and liked by them.
They all talk about they used to hang out at the
because he's
bar.
so articulate. He's portrayed in Mindhunters, but I mean there's documentary upon documentary about him, but he's articulate. He's even funny, you know?
He's likable in quotation marks, because that is the character he created to be able to do what he wanted to do, right?
That's what's frightening.
So it's just interesting because we hear about all of this abuse in the household for a lot of serial killers, and some of them have actually then gone on to that their mothers being their first victims, actually, which kind of sounds like it opens up the floodgates.
Yeah. Well, that's another common theme, is almost like the gateway drug. Once they start, they can't stop, you know?
Yeah, because I heard...
Not to use the Pringles.
Sorry, Pringles. Don't add us. Sponsor us. Yeah, but apparently the first murder is the hardest. I'm not... This isn't advice that I'm giving here, but I have read that the first one is the hardest, but the more you commit...
You become desensitized.
Yeah, they kind of blend in together. And I think I heard that in the context of warfare, that after a while, you do become desensitized. You can't tell them apart so much, et cetera, et cetera. So is it the same for serial killers? I don't know.
Yeah. So in the 1960s, psychologist J.M. MacDonald, now most of us who are into true crime know about the McDonald Triangle, but he popularized the 3 behavioral red flags that serial killers exhibited during childhood. Now, even if you don't know much about serial killers, you probably have come across this in true
and I think shows. Now the triangle is actually like a not a decathlon, that's a sporting event, but like
a hexagon.
Yeah, they've added more.
Research has come along. Research has come along since then. Because one element is bedwetter in the triangle. That's very common for kids. And I actually didn't like this because a lot of kids with special needs, this is going to happen for a lot of their lives. So I don't fucking like that one. Another is fire setter. I mean, which... you know, a lot of people like to sit by more, I don't know, cut that out, whatever, cut that out. But fire setter, you know. And the last is animal cruelty. Okay, that's not good. So those were the 3 different elements of the McDonald Triangle. So those 3 things gave a real lead into how serial killers turned violent. This theory was disproven because the sample used included people who threatened to act violently, but not those who acted violently. There's a difference.
That's different, yeah.
Yeah. But this became a popular belief that if you exhibited those traits, you had a high likelihood of becoming a serial killer. And some modern criminologists believe this isn't always the case, though. This was superseded by behavioral studies that theorized that the serial killer's dysfunctional childhood created a cold-hearted lack of empathy. See, for me, that's what it seems more concrete and legitimate, you know?
I can get that, because you would have to put up some major barriers to protect yourself emotionally.
So part of empathy comes from the parents modeling empathy and the relationship they had with one another. Because if you grow up in a home with abusive parents, you learn by watching and seeing and experiencing. And if you are never exposed to functionality, to love, to stability, how do you ever know what that is? You know, some people only experience those things in adulthood or when they leave the family home, and then what the hell does it mean to them? Stability, love, whatever. It's, you know, almost like intangible things that they've not experienced that other people have experienced. But how do you suddenly learn?
It's like how confused, because we had a very, very lovely upbringing in the grand scheme of things. I struggle to understand when people react with anger and unkindness instantly. I don't understand that behavior very much. I try to.
You know, another thing I can't understand is pettiness and nastiness.
Because we didn't have that growing up. We had it around us, obviously, at school. There was a lot of pettiness, but Do you know what I mean? I find it very difficult to get in the mindset and to understand people whose initial responses are that kind of anger, jealousy, pettiness.
Exactly. And also when
I can imagine it in reverse. If you're brought up that's your initial response to things happening to you, that you would struggle to get into the mindset of someone who in a difficult situation reacts with like kindness or compassion or trying to understand or open up or whatever, right? So then that's completely foreign. So I get that.
Because the thing is also, like, even as an adult, close to 40, I still find it so uneasy and unsettling and weird and alien when I see traits in other people that are so different to what we were brought up to believe is normal or what we experience. For example, pettiness, nastiness. Like, if someone's an asshole, fine, they're an asshole, it's okay to say it. But to say something sort of below the belt, nasty, criticize their appearance, when I hear that, it kind of gives me the ick. It really gives me the ick, because it's not something that we were led to believe is normal. Or people who are so distrusting, defensive, don't have emotional intelligence. Like, I can understand where it comes from, but it's so alien to me that it repels me. You know, and that
we're painting ourselves in a very nice light. I would like to point out that we are totally happy to rip people to shreds if they deserve it. But
but that's the thing, if they deserve it. And you know, we are not people who criticize people's appearances.
Unless it's Levi Belfield and we're talking about his small penis, if you remember.
or Paul Byrne.
Yeah.
That came up in Paul Byrne episode 2.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, when it comes to things like that, you know, that's the kind of thing that gives me the ick when you hear people just whatever.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, it's very hard when someone has a totally different upbringing and way of dealing with different situations. It can be really hard. And we all face this in relationships and friendships and stuff, to see their point of view. So it must be the same for these people that are raised in anger, hatred, addiction, and all abuse.
Yeah.
To understand a normal-ish relationship with someone.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, because when I see sometimes people's relationship choices or how they respond to things, why are you reacting like that? Why have you interpreted it that way? Why? But again, it's learned behavior. So much of the way we behave is learned behavior. And apparently we are hardwired by the time we're 3 years old. So those first few years are so important, you know? So yeah, part of empathy comes from the parents modeling it and the relationship the parents had with each other. So a lack of empathy is a primary characteristic of a psychopath, and empathy is like the lack of concern for others and the effects of their actions on them, which links to remorse or lack of remorse. So not all psychopaths are criminals, but it is a trait of serial killers. So the FBI explains.
So are they saying all serial killers are psychopaths?
It's a trait of serial killers.
Yeah.
A trait. So not all necessarily, but it's a trait that serial killers
a common
thing. Denominator. So
I don't know how you could be a serial killer and not be a psychopath. But anyway.
Well, it gets complex. There's more factors, but
this is where I lose my PhD.
It gets biological too. So the FBI explains, I hate saying this word, is it psychopathy?
Yeah.
As a personality disorder manifested in people who use a mixture of charm, manipulation, intimidation, and occasional violence to harm others and satisfy their own needs. Apparently, there are not too many of them around, luckily, but they have an emotional...
And I've dated all of them!
They have an emotional absence in relationships. Oops. and interact in a superficial and manipulative manner. So...
Hi, Adam.
Yeah, that's one that came to mind. So one example that fits this mold is Ted Bundy, who was one of the most notorious U.S. serial killers and born to a single mother and raised by his grandparents. He grew up surrounded by lies. He was told that he was the adopted son of his grandparents and that his mother was his sister. This resulted in him being extremely confused about his own identity as an adult. And he was considered a classic psychopath. He compared...
Sorry, I'm going to cut this out, but I missed who you're talking about.
Ted Bundy.
Okay, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. He compared his serial killing to stamp collecting in a very sort of impersonal, desensitized way.
Oh my God. So it is like an addiction compulsion thing.
Yeah. Collecting trophies, you know? So
gross.
Another common trait is paraphilia, which is abnormal sexual behaviors and urges. And these behaviors have been linked to sexual abuse as a child. So lust, serial murder is sometimes an outgrowth of paraphilia, and fantasy plays a huge role in some offenders. So another famous example is the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer, who, again, he's just featured on Netflix. He was sexually abused by his neighbor when he was 10 years old, and his parents divorced when he was 17. So both his parents moved out of the family home, leaving Dahmer with his growing paranoia and terrible fantasies. Looking at Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood, you will find that at an early age, he was fun and active, and his dad described him as very exuberant. He liked to wrestle, liked to run around, ham it up for the camera. He liked to play with kids and get together with them. These are not typically characteristics of a serial killer, who scientists say are born with this gene, this aggression gene. And Dahmer had been a normal childhood until his dad received his PhD in chemistry. The family then moved to Ohio, relocated 3 times before settling down in a place called Bath in Ohio. And when Dahmer's family made the move, his father and mother noticed that he had become shy and antisocial, which is very different to the previous description we heard from his dad. Jeffrey then began collecting roadkill and dissecting it in experiments. Again, one of the triads, one of the factors of the McDonald triangle. So it is said that Jeffrey Dahmer, his family life, that sounds great, all sounds nice. Parents together until he was 17. That's
fairly stable upbringing, apart from the abusive neighbor, though.
Exactly, the sexual abuse he had as a child, he experienced as a child. So serial killers are often obsessed with violence, voyeurism, and pornography, and the mixture of violence and sexual desire. So another frightening trait is that serial killers often don't look frightening at all. You know how people often say, "Oh God, he had the look of a serial killer." Well, I hate to say
they probably aren't. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so sometimes ones you don't suspect. So it can often be surprising how charming, talkative, or polite they could be. Like with Ted Bundy, people used to describe him all the time as being so good looking. He's articulate. Wasn't he trained to be a lawyer?
Yeah, even funny. After, this is like post capture, so they know, you know what I mean? But yeah, he was charming.
Charming, funny, quick-witted,
I mean, these people like Richard Ramirez, Ted Bundy, managed to convince people to marry them.
Yeah.
After they were caught,
And we did an episode when the podcast was still called We Knew the Moon, on hybristophilia.
Yeah, which is this desire to find a partner who's incarcerated. So it's not just going out with someone and they end up in prison and you stick by their side while they're in prison. It's specifically looking for a partner who's in jail.
Yeah. So it can be surprising, how, in fact, it is surprising how they have a lot of success with the ladies after they were already convicted of murder, So many serial killers are exceptionally skillful in their presentation, so much so that they are beyond suspicions and are therefore difficult to apprehend. I mean, Ted Bundy, well-educated, training to be a lawyer, as I said, well-dressed, charming, funny, quick-witted, good with words,
Can I just say there's an amazing book by Anne Rule, which I think is called The Stranger Beside Me. Anne Rule was a true crime journalist, and she actually knew Ted Bundy because they worked, and I can't remember the details, but I think it was on some kind of helpline at a time where everyone was freaking out because of all those serial killing that was going on by Ted Bundy. So she worked with him. And so she wrote this book about her friend, Ted Bundy, who, at the time she considered him a friend. And obviously not afterwards because it's disgusting. But that was such an insightful book. And I absolutely love Anne Rule. So do check out if you like reading books about true crime as well as listening to podcasts.
And that's what I struggled with when I watched, do you remember the film that Zac Efron was in? About something, he was in a film where he portrayed Ted Bundy. It had a really long name, Wickedly something, I can't remember. Really good film.
Can we just say, we've done this before. Zac Efron. What an amazing actor.
Yeah. I mean, he's come a long way since High School Musical or whatever it's called, Glee. Yeah, but he did a great job. And one thing I struggled to understand and wrap my head around was the fact that he had that relationship with, I can't remember her name in real life, but she was portrayed by Lily Collins, who had her own child. And I remember in the film, that relationship was portrayed as loving, that he was, you know, a good stepfather. And I couldn't understand how do you choose that this woman you're going to love and treat respectfully and lovingly, and then those you see as objects to torture. Yeah. I couldn't understand. And also, yeah,
she obviously didn't meet his criteria for that.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Is it like, is there a list of criteria that makes one person worthy of staying alive in his eyes, and one, as you know, that he depersonalizes? And
well, because Ted Bundy had a thing for women with dark hair and a center parting from memory, so maybe she wasn't that. And I think it was an ex that that looked like that, and so they thought it might be because he had been rejected by this ex or something or other. Yeah. I know I
can't wrap my head around the fact that some of them are married, and do they genuinely love that partner? Are they capable of separating the two, having a double life, having a partner that they love and actually respect?
In a crude way, the only way I can kind of understand it is when men have their wives and their mistresses, and they see them as serving very different purposes. And I know that's a really oversimplification.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Is that one theory?
Is that it? That this person is providing their legacy in another way in terms of kids and raising their kids?
Yeah.
And then they have their,
or is that the cover
other side?
Or even more crudely, is that person just the cover and there isn't any?
Maybe, because we do have a lot of killers that are, you know, linked to the church and stuff like that. I mean, they cannot possibly believe the words of Christ because they're killing people.
Or is it a case of split personality where you're one person at home and a different, do you know what I mean? There's so many different theories, and that I couldn't wrap my head around, and I'm so interested in that. So back to the profile of a serial killer. They are usually not rich or poor, but have moderate earnings. And only 16% of the nearly 107 serial killers that were studied, that he'd studied, sorry, who am I talking about? McDonald, went to college, and only 4% actually.
Wait, start that sentence again.
So only 16% of the nearly 107 serial killers that McDonald studied went to college, and of those, only 4% actually graduated. Okay. So that's interesting. Though most have very little education, successful serial killers must still possess the wit to be able to dispose of multiple bodies and outsmart the police by leaving little to no traces of evidence. John Wayne Gacy is another example. He was a born salesman with a gift of the gab. He used to manage his family restaurant and was a respected member of the community. So much so that he often performed as a clown at kids' parties, earning the nickname the Killer Clown. And as a student in Seattle, back to Bundy, he held lots of different jobs. He held a job for the Suicide Hotline Center.
That's where he worked.
That's what I thought. Yeah. He became involved in politics, and he was a Republican, but you know, that's to add to his
least of his crimes.
But... I know, yeah. I mean, it adds to his growing list of sins, but it's in fact the least of his crimes. So according to Mulaney of the FBI, the mind of a serial killer is very different to that of a normal person. Rarely do you have a normal person fantasizing about murder. Thank God. There's a list of motivators that affect serial killers. So these are fear of rejection, the need for power, and a sense of inferiority, and some purely by anger. Some are motivated purely by anger. So some serial killers are motivated by failings in the home they grew up in, and issues in single-parent families, pornography, and a need to seek acceptance, which they never got. So again, that ties in with rejection. So John Wayne Gacy, again, was abused in childhood by a family friend and had an extremely strict dad and was always trying to get his dad's affection. So we've got several different elements there. You know, the overbearing dominant parent, the childhood abuse, the rejection of trying to get his dad's affection. So is it just a bad childhood that creates serial killers? No. but not only. So the question was then raised in the study, why, when there are two kids who grow up in the same household, does one cope and one kill? So
I'm going to argue that the other one probably doesn't cope, but just doesn't kill, you know, because we have also a whole bunch of studies of people who have come from really, really disadvantaged backgrounds in terms of abuse and upbringing and so forth. And okay, they don't go on to kill, but they do not have an easy life as a result of this. So.
Yeah. So not all abused children become serial killers, and not all serial killers are victims of childhood abuse. However, the connection between the two could not be dismissed as just a coincidence. So researchers have been looking into whether some people are predisposed to murder from birth, and the conclusion is that there are neurological differences and that some people may be more predisposed. And so we've got the balance of neurological and psychological. So in 2013, Dr. Adrian Raine began brain imaging in serial killers, violent criminals, and psychopaths. So their brains were deemed to be different, with diminished activities in the area of the brain linked to self-awareness and emotional processing. So they have a lower function in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that regulates and controls behavior.
And isn't there a link between injuries to that area?
Yes. And what's his name? Aaron Hernandez. After he committed suicide, you know, the football player that was convicted of murder. After he was convicted and committed suicide, you know, it was sad, actually. What he did was horrendous, but he did have brain injuries, and it may have been a different outcome had they used that in court. I mean, different outcome, no, he still would have been convicted because he did commit murder, but would he have committed suicide?
I think that was another angle added to the McDonald triangle injuries to head injuries, because a lot of the serial killers, it's come out that they had these different injuries. So which affects this area of the brain that you said. Yeah, so the prefrontal cortex helps us moderate our behavior, basically, right? Yeah. So the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain, this theory applied to impulse rage killers, and the serial killers had high functioning prefrontal cortexes and low functioning in the amygdala, the emotional part of the brain responsible for empathy and remorse. So for them, this part was 18% smaller, and this could be why they could kill without guilt or remorse. So you only need on average 18% less empathy.
So this goes back to nature or nurture. So neurologists don't believe that biology is the only factor. And interestingly, Dr. Raine discovered that he also had low functioning amygdala part of the brain, similar to serial killers. And
I remember this study because he was looking through, wasn't he? And he was like, oh, fuck, who's this fucked up brain? Oh, shit, it's mine.
Yeah, and I was interested because I thought, is that why you have a curiosity? Because in some way you resonate their patterns of behavior. I don't know, I'm not saying he's a serial killer, but, you know, is this why?
Well, it's like your fucked up friends who decide to go off and become a therapist, and you're like, you're on a journey of self-discovery here, huh?
Yeah.
The wounded healer.
But the difference is that Dr. Raine grew up in a loving household. So despite the fact that he had biological and neurological similarities, what was different with him and the serial killers that he was studying is that he grew up in a loving household. So the conclusion was that everything seems to suggest that what a lot of what creates a serial killer is to do with nurture. So it's a biological predisposition, but the environment contributes. So according to criminologist Dr. Raine, both biological and social factors contribute to the making of a murderer. And in his book, The Anatomy of Violence, Dr. Raine explains that genetics and environment work together to encourage violent behavior. For example, those with a specific variant of the enzyme, this is going to be horrendous to pronounce, monoamine oxidase A gene, are more prone to displaying violent behavior if they have an abusive upbringing. And a child susceptible to genetically driven violent conduct does not necessarily become a criminal. However, genetics in tandem with environmental factors such as violent childhood experiences work together to shape a person. And apparently, serial killers go through three phases. So first, the fantasies. the playing out of ideas in their head. And this reminded me a lot of the Levi Bellfield case and how he operated. Then is the trolling phase, when the killer searches for a victim and tries to lure them in. This reminded me of when you were telling us about, you know, how he used to drive around looking for victims, looking for a location, looking for a victim.
He was driving around Twickenham Green for Emily. He was driving around for 45 minutes at least that they caught on CCTV,
and
waiting
looking
for a vulnerable person.
Yeah, that matches the person's fantasy. You know, because he liked blondes, didn't he? Then comes the wooing phase. And in the wooing phase, the killer tries to win the confidence of a victim before luring them into their trap.
Yeah, Levi approached Emily, they think, and she rebuffed him.
Yeah, and then the capture phase. This is when the serial killer feels in complete and absolute control. So I was chilling reading this and researching this because it really reminded me of literally the exact steps that Levi Bellfield took. And in 1998, Joel Norris described the murder phase as the ritual. Sorry, hold on a sec. Okay, so in 1998, Joel Norris described the murder phase as the ritual reunited of the killer's childhood, but with the roles reversed.
Getting that control back that they never had. Oh, that's awful.
So torture, degradation, and rape often precede murder. And some serial killers want to remain with the victim after they kill them to engage in sexual activity, which is called necrophilia. The killer then often takes personal items from the victim as a trophy and a reminder. And this is something we see often, you know, in all the sort of drama shows as well, about what's the one with Gillian, what is her name? Forget that. Never mind.
Anderson? X-Files?
Gillian Anderson. Yeah. No, not X-Files. She was in one called The Fall.
Such a good show.
Yeah. So once the kill is over, the excitement is over, and they return to reality and often become depressed. Depression sets in for them because they've had such a high and then have to come back to reality. So they often offend again because they need that feeling of gratification again, and also because the murder may not have lived up to their hopes. So they use this experience to plan the next one. And during this phase, the killer can become so depressed that they may commit suicide. The 4 phases then repeat as he prepares for the next kill. So number 1 is trolling, number 2 is wooing, number 3 is capturing, number 4 is murdering. And recently, the FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime published a report to assist law enforcement in the apprehension of serial killers. And the document studied 480 murders involving 92 different killers. It covered motivation, method, location, body disposal, sexual activity, and victim selection. Often the killer would pick the most accessible victim, which is often, sadly, sex workers, which is what we've seen in so many cases. So unlike most homicide, there's no relationship between the killers and the victims. So there's a big difference between, homicide cases and serial killers.
Because we've discussed this about how, I can't remember if this stat was for the US or the UK, but 1% of murders are committed by serial killers.
Yeah.
And they are, in the large part, random in terms of the victim. At least from the victim's point of view, the serial killer might feel very attached to them before they commit their crime. And we don't know which is more terrifying, the thought of being killed by a random or someone you know. I mean, I choose neither, but yeah, I forgot my point.
Do you know what? I actually, I don't know, when I heard that statistic, I actually felt reassured. But then at the same time, no, because it's more likely that you're killed by somebody you know. So, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because, what's scary also about the Levi Bellfield case is how many of them happen so close to somebody's front door, your own front door, and you think you're safe in your local area. And
you're like, oh, great, my new house has a bus stop right nearby.
Do you know what? This is
that's
exactly
convenient and safe.
Yeah, and this is exactly when you drive home. I always say, text me when you're home. This is why I never let, our mother walk home if it's any time after dusk, and even her who's, just as anxious as we are about safety.
I know, we call our mom the prophecy of doom because if you tell her anything, she can pull out
catastrophize it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So
that's what it's called.
Yes. So we affectionately know her as the prophecy of doom. But yeah, where it comes to her own safety, she's more blasé, isn't she?
I mean, she always says, "Oh, but close to home." I'm like, yeah, but you know how many murders happen close to home? And then she'll walk through Chiswick House and Grounds, which is near where we live. It's in between my home and her home. And it has so much sort of
hiding places.
What is it called? Forest land. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah.
I'm not good at nature words. Like
foliage.
But like where it's off the beaten track. Do you know what I mean? Oh God, I just would not walk through there alone. Not even in the day. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, so I don't let her. But so unlike most homicides, there's no relationship between the killer and the victims, which makes identifying the killer harder. And serial killers can be men from all races. Strangulation is the most common method of killing, and 79% of cases involve sexual activity. So in over half the cases, the killers removed items from the crime scene as a memento. Gary Ridgway, who was the Green River Killer, used to troll sex workers, and he evaded arrest for 2 decades.
I mean, that was largely because people did not place much value on the lives of those sex workers, unfortunately.
And that's a common theme. That's a common theme.
The sad thing is that their job makes them more vulnerable.
Yeah.
It doesn't make them less worthy. It just makes them more vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a sad common theme in a lot of these cases. So Ted Bundy even helped convict the Green River Killer by helping the FBI profile killers. And Bundy's profile was even more accurate than the FBI's. Yeah. Which is interesting.
And do you know what film is based off that? Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, I didn't know.
Because you know how why can't I think of the guy's name? The serial killer in Silence of the Lambs.
Hannibal Lecter?
Hannibal Lecter, yeah. Hannibal Lecter from jail is helping Clarice Starling catch Buffalo Bill, the serial killer. She's visiting him to get insight into this serial killer's mind, and that's based off that, yeah. And I think also a little bit Ed Kemper, because he was also helping.
I need to revisit the scene. I have not seen it since child.
Yes, and not since we watched it far too early. But what a good film. What a good film.
Anthony Hopkins, I like him a lot.
Love him.
I love, and he was recently diagnosed autistic, and I think that's a good fact we need to share. Yeah, good fact. So it was DNA analysis that managed to convict Ridgway in the end. And the nature versus nurture debate is still ongoing.
Can I just say, going back to that debate about, how sex workers are valued less in society and so forth, like, I hope that's changing. But with Ridgway, they only started really paying attention when he actually killed a few people that were not sex workers.
Yeah, unsurprising.
And suddenly, let's pay a bit more attention to this.
Yeah. So we talked about how serial killers actually only make up 1% of murderers, and so I wanted to talk about the difference between murder.
1% of murders are by serial killers.
Oh, okay. Yeah, delete what I said.
I don't know how that makes a difference, but it will.
Yeah,
but I don't.
So let's talk about what the difference is between a murderer and a serial killer. So a large distinction that separates serial killers from other murderers are motives. Their motives to kill. So normally homicides are committed due to disputes that range from like family affairs, gang violence, financial difficulties, and disputes between lovers and between friends. For example, recently you covered the EastEnders actress murdered by her brother. That would be considered a homicide. Yeah. And a serial killer is not a regular murderer. A serial killer is not a regular murderer. A murderer has a vendetta, a nice specific personal thing. What the fuck did I write? Sorry, get rid of all that. A serial killer is not a regular murderer, because a murderer has a vendetta and a personal issue against the victim. Unlike a normal homicide, serial killers are only driven by instinct and a desire to kill.
So are you saying, like, for example, a gang member might be responsible for 10 deaths, but if they are drug related or business in quotation marks related, money,
then there's the motive is different. The motive is then that would be considered a homicide because there's an actual motive.
So they are a mass murderer, not a serial killer.
Yeah,
probably.
A serial killer is somebody that fits the profile of everything we talked about, where it is the desire to kill. You know,
okay,
like a sport, like a fantasy. Yeah. And due to the sexual desires and the need to fulfill their arousing fantasies, it often drives serial killers to murder those who are complete strangers. So in the publication of Beyond the Pleasure Principle in 1920, I'm going to talk about Freud. Sigmund Freud came up with two theories about the aggression in which humans express. In the publication of Beyond the Pleasure Principle in 1920, Sigmund Freud came up with two theories about the aggression in which humans express. So creating two different and opposing instincts, Freud came up with the death instinct and the life instinct. So the death instinct is that of destructive behavior towards the society around them. And what Freud found that led him to this theory of the death instinct was that those he had studied who had experienced bad experiences kept repeating those experiences, even though they were still unpleasant, not necessarily only relating to murder. The opposite of that is a life instinct, in which Freud believes that people try to maintain a better life and try to achieve bigger goals for themselves. So born with these aggressive and destructive stimuli, serial killers go on to commit these horrific crimes, even though they know most of the time that it's wrong. So, because we know what we've discovered is they're not stupid, you know? Mm-hmm. In my conclusion, nature does choose what traits we are born with, but at the same time, these traits cannot be exposed without a mechanism that triggers these individuals to commit the horrific crimes. So without the alignment of both natural genetic defects, in quotation marks, and the cultural nurturing in which humans are brought up in, serial killers cannot become vicious killers. So if we can curb domestic violence, then the chances for serial killers to become violent will decrease significantly, making our world a safer place. So again, another thing we talk about is back to the parents, you know, stop fucking up your kids.
Yeah, and like serial killing is obviously the extreme example of what happens if your kid grows up in neglect or abuse.
But get therapy. Do you know what I mean? Like,
and again, we know that all
like
of
what you've said it before. If you're a parent and you're fucked up, get therapy. Don't pass it on to your kids. You know, and okay,
I know that sounds like it's a place of privilege.
Yeah, it's easy to say get therapy, but and we know that, you know, NHS waiting lists in this country are long. Therapy is expensive, but do something. I know some people can't also identify when they're dysfunctional. That's the other issue.
If you think why we should have these support networks, the NHS and all of the associated organizations that help work on mental health issues and supporting parents and families, and if you wonder why the cost of living crisis is going to affect you, even if you're sitting comfortable and being able to afford tomatoes or whatever is not in stock these days, this is why. Because if we want to have a nice functioning society, we've got to give everyone the chance to grow up with privilege, with these privileges of a safe home. It's not a privilege. It should be a fucking right to grow up in security.
And that's the thing. I think honestly, when you become a parent, you have a duty. And I know it sounds privileged to say, get therapy, sort yourself out, but you have a duty to do that. You do have a duty to do that, to do whatever you can to improve yourself enough that you don't fuck your kids up. So I know that not often people realize that sometimes people can't even identify their own traumatic upbringings because it's so normal to them and so natural. So therefore they can't identify the fact that they may be doing that to their kids too.
But this is why, you know, we need to have, this is why fuck the Tories is what I'm going to call this section, because the whole idea of this country in the UK was for it to be a welfare state and have a security net for people that need help, whether they identify that themselves or whether someone else does. But that's why we need these security networks. We need to have a great education system with teachers who know how to look out for things. And the healthcare system, social care system, all of these things, and working together as well, because we've raised that a couple of times where these different departments are not working together. And if they had, maybe things would have been spotted sooner. So that's why we need all this shit. If you think, well, what does it matter to me? I can afford private this, that, and the other. It's because we want to live in a safe community, and like a rising tide rises all ships and makes it better and safer for everyone.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want that unless
and
you're
also,
a prick? Are
I
you
remember...
a prick?
Are you asking me
My
first?
question? No, I know your thoughts. I'm asking our one possible, I don't know, maybe a Tory slipped through the net and is still listening, episode 15 or whatever this is.
Do you know, one thing I found like controversial, and it annoyed me, and it still annoys me to this day, 6-7 years later, is that I remember when I went for my 12-week appointment at the hospital when I, with the twins before they were born, and they register you on the system and whatever, take some details, and then they work out whether you, well, let me tell you what they ask. They ask whether you're married, whether you own property, your profession. And I was like, well, like, this is supposed to be about pregnancy. So like,
they're trying to put you in a category there, right?
They are. And I'll tell you that category in a sec. But I thought, okay, profession, I can see why you're asking that, because it could be, related to healthcare. If I'm on my feet all day, which I was teaching, is your job a risk physically to you? But I asked, why you asking if I'm married or own property? And she said, it's to determine whether you are a high or low social risk. And it's one of two categories. And I just couldn't believe that. So if you're married and if you own property, you are a lower social risk. And I think that is insane. So luckily, I was deemed a low social risk. Now, owning property, I was 31 at the time, is actually a very hard to do thing in London, where property prices are so expensive and mortgages are hard to get. Now, I don't think owning property or not owning property makes a parent any better or worse. That's insane. Being married, again, 50% of marriages end in divorce. What does that even matter? Do you know what I mean?
I mean, I hope that that's come out of some kind of stats, but it does seem like if those are the only kind of questions, and if they've only got two categories and they're basing it off those answers.
Well, one of them is asking, are you rich or poor? And if you've got money, you're less of the social risk. I don't like that at all, because at the end of the day, like, often we have money because we're working a lot, and often parents who work a lot, I know that when I'm working a lot, I actually don't feel like as good a parent, and I would actually be a better parent if I didn't work. Do you know what I mean? I'd be more attentive. So I just thought that was so dumb. So dumb. So I don't like that. Anyway, so that's my point. They ask the stupidest questions, because really, if you want to determine whether somebody's a low social risk or a high social risk, ask some, dive deeper than that. Dive deeper than that.
Ask whether they like to torture animals, or whether...
Do you know what I mean? It's not going to be what they do for a living, or whether they bought their property. That does
seem like a very, very, and maybe that's why, a very superficial way of assessing risk.
And unpolitically correct. And this is 2016. I just didn't think it was okay. Didn't think it was acceptable. Didn't like it. Thought it was stupid.
Probably the kind of thing that has not changed in decades and decades. And now at a time where the cost of living makes owning property almost impossible for younger people, and where marriage is not so much of a...
That being said, I'm pro NHS, I'm pro NHS.
No, but the problems that we have with the NHS is because of the cuts that are made with the NHS.
Yeah, well, the Tories are strangulating them and suffocating them. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you what I did like about the whole process, the whole pregnancy process, is that at the 16-week appointment, you have it without the father, so that they can check whether you are safe and from the father, and I thought that was good, because it gives people
opportunity to
raise a concern.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it? But
so that's the story of this week. And honestly, it answered a lot of questions for me. It answered a lot of questions, because I kept asking, it's always the family. I was like, it's always the family. It's always the family. And even when you meet people day to day, I try to work them out based on their family scenario, their upbringing. But actually, the biological factor is so interesting.
So the answer, I guess, is it depends. It's a bit of nurture. It's a bit of nature.
It's both.
And it's this perfect shitstorm of a combination. Yeah. Probably combined with some opportunity. As well, if they find a way in which they can perform their compulsions, and intelligence, because I'm guessing that potential serial killers that are not so clever, or I can't think of the right word, but perhaps they're caught after the first one. They never have the opportunity to become a serial killer, so maybe you need to have a bit of smarts around you to be able to evade capture long enough to become a technical serial killer.
So I mean,
Ugh.
I satisfied my curiosity. Yeah, I satisfied my curiosity because nature versus nurture is a huge debate, you know, and and I find it fascinating one also, just, you know, with the twins, just, you know, they've got so many traits that they've naturally got, you know, from me as their parent or from Jim as their parent, and I always wonder, wow, did they learn that from us, or is it just inherent? For example, you know, sorry to go off and talk about kids, it'd be boring, but like I was
do you inherit being a little shit, or were they born with it?
No, cut that out, because it sounds like you're calling them little shit.
But they're cute with it.
But like yesterday I was in meetings with the school for half the day, their annual review, and like, you know, Rio's so good at music. I was a music teacher. She doesn't know that. You know, Che wrote, they interviewed him, you know, asked him some questions, and he said in his questionnaire that he wanted to be a writer when he grew up. You know, you're a journalist. I've written a lot professionally. Our mother was a journalist.
How does he even know what that is?
I wondered that. And then when I tried to talk about it in the car, he was like, no, I don't want to be a writer. I was like, oh, so you don't want to write stories for money? Oh, yes, I do want to do that. So anyway, so I'll cut that short, because, you know, this is a crime podcast about a boring parenting one. And God, they're so fucking boring parenting podcasts. I don't even know how that's a genre. I'm sorry to anyone that has one, but honest, I can't. Can't with that shit.
I'm going to cut that out, because I think a lot of them listen to ours.
Who?
I don't know.
It's so dull. But
also the Wine Time girls. I don't want them thinking, although there's Mum's True Crime.
Yeah, they're still true crime. They're good. But I can't remember the point I was making. But anyway, yeah. So nature versus nurture, very fucking interesting. And I didn't quell my worries and my anxieties. I just answered some questions to help me understand it more. And the biological factor was something that I hadn't come across.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because it does come up in every single case. We're like, but what made them do that? So yeah. Oh, and also little PSA, if your kid gets a head injury, take him to the doctor. Why do I have to say this?
God, I shouldn't laugh. Oh my God. That being said, when you do, they're like, why are you here?
Yeah.
All kids hurt their heads. And trust me, I've been many times saying Annie for cut that out, because it makes it sound like the kids are neglected and get. But anyway, that's it.
All right. Well, thanks for freaking us the fuck out some more, and thank you, listeners. Mwah! See you next week. Mwah! Bye.
Bye. Hey there. Thanks for being a loyal listener.
Do you need a new website or want to boost your social media performance? Or do you hate podcast editing? You've tried optimizing your website and social media channels, but you're still not getting the listeners, downloads, and engagement you want?
We, the Safier sisters, love helping people with tasks that they hate. We know a thing or two about podcasts, websites, and social media, and we love working with other podcasters and business owners.
So why not head over to switchbladesisterssocialclub.com and go to our Work With Us section. We believe in collaboration over competition. A rising tide raises all ships.
Bye!